So I think, Trevor, we kind of talked about this as sort of the end of the show or end of the segment one is what's we're going to talk about what are the reasons that we believe that there should be a great deal of confidence, at least for this next season, the Notre Dame defense should remain really, really good. And that number one is Marcus Freeman's presence and Marcus Freeman's impact on the program. And this is a holistic way of looking at it. Number one is the mentality. As long as he stays who he is, the program will stay what it is. You know, he is someone who does have a great defensive mind. That's why he is at Notre Dame. It's why he's the head coach now. It was for the job he did as the defensive coordinator. I mean, Marcus Freeman has played Georgia twice, and it was from 2020 to 2024 as defensive coordinator. The first time I think they held him to 24 points. The second time, and that's when he had Cincinnati's players. The second time they held him to 10. You know, I mean, this is a guy that has a great defensive mind. There's no doubt about it. So there's that. You look at the impact he's had on the program from a recruiting standpoint, and that leads me to number two. The big reason why I think this defense is going to keep rolling, at least for this year, is, look, you had a lot of talent that you lost. We talked about it. Xavier Watts and Riley Mills and Howard Cross and Jack Kaiser and Jordan Clark and Benjamin Morrison and guys like that. But, man, when you look at it, there's still a lot of talent coming back. And this is the side of the ball where when you talk about reasons for optimism, Marcus Freeman, this is what we're talking about. It's, okay, whatever you think about the hire he made, we're going to find out. We don't know. One thing we do know is they've recruited this side of the ball really, really well in recent seasons. And all those players are now going into his first class. His first defensive class is actually going into their senior season. It's the Josh Burnhams, the Jalen Sneeds, the guys that are still left from that class. Some of it's gone. Jaden Mickey transferred. Benjamin's going pro. Jaden Bellamy's gone. Nolan Ziegler's gone. Tyson Ford's gone. Aiden Gobira's gone. So a lot of that class is gone. But what's coming back is going to be a foundational piece of this defense. Josh Burnham, Junior Tuilamaka, Jalen Sneed, that group of players. His first full class as head coach are now going into their junior seasons, and that is still arguably the best recruiting class Notre Dame has had in recent years. It's debatable because the 24 one was really flipping good as well. But you talk about the Drake Bowen, you talk about Jaden Ausberry, you talk about Christian Gray and just Don Schuler and just the talent that they landed in that class is really Boubacar Traore, Armel Mukam. There's a lot of talent. Some of it's made an impact already. Some of it hasn't. Like, Armel Mukam hasn't made an impact yet. Preston Zenner hasn't made an impact yet. But still talented players. There have been a lot of years in the past, including years where Notre Dame was really good, where Preston Zenner is a starter for you and you're like, he's a good football player. Now he can't get on the field because of how loaded you are. That's when you know you're recruiting at a high level. Like, you look at Preston Zenner, you're like, you're telling me that guy wouldn't have started over Joe Schmidt? You're telling me that guy wouldn't have started over Drew White, with all due respect to Drew? You tell me that guy wouldn't have started over Dan Fox? He absolutely would have. But on this team, he can't get on the field. Why? Because they've recruited this defense so well. And then you've got the 24 classes now going into year. Now Kingston gets a whole year under his belt. Bryce Young gets a year under his belt. Bronte Johnson, Kennedy Urlacher, Leonard Moore. This group now gets another year, and then you're just bringing in Chris Burgess. You're bringing in Madden Faramo. You're bringing in Dallas Golden, Mark Zachary, Jadon Blair, Cree Thomas, Brandon Logan. And you're just like, dude, if you can't coach this defense up, you're in the wrong line of work. I mean, if you can't coach this group of players into and I'm not even talking about the transfer guys. We're talking about what they have recruited since Marcus Freeman has been here. If you can't coach this into a top 10 defense, you got to find out something else to do with your life, because this coaching thing just ain't for you. Yeah. And that's the biggest thing for me, Trev, more than anything is Chris Ash is walking into it. Does he have a Joey Bosa? No. But he's not going to look around that linebacker room and DB room and be like, man, this isn't anything like what I've had in the past. He's going to be like, okay, I got me some dudes to work with. And now it's like, dude, don't screw it up. That's task number one. Don't F this up. You're walking into a pretty good situation. Keep it rolling. And it's because of that talent. And that gets you pretty fired up, man. Like anytime I start feeling down about this hire, Trev, I'm like, look, man, I start listening to all the guys and you're like, yeah, I ain't going to be all right. Because we don't think Trev, we don't think Chris Ash is a bad coach.
No.
I don't think he's an elite coach. And I have some issues with, some things I've heard about him, but it isn't like he's not Brian Van Gorder, where who's the only coach in the country that could screw up Jalen Smith? Brian Van Gorder. He literally ruined Jalen Smith's ability to just be an all-time great. And he was still pretty freaking good, won a Butkus Award. But that's the thing is, like, he's not that. And so when you start getting down or questioning, you start just listening to all the players coming back, and you're like, all right, they're going to be all right.
Literally anything short of Chris Ash telling them to go do the wrong thing, it's going to be fine, right? He's walking into a winning situation, and that was something that you and I both talked about when the hire was announced. But the depth of talent is crazy, and it was an ongoing conversation that you and I had and that we've had with others as the season went on, once the injuries started to mount up. And it was always, gosh, in past years, you lose Ben Morris, and that's your season. In past years, you lose 2 Vipers. That's your season. In one season, you lose basically 3 defensive tackles. That's your season, and Notre Dame played in the national championship. They were a 3rd and 11 stop away from potentially going down and tying it, man. Look, there is a lot of reason for skepticism, and I can absolutely admit that. But I am, now that I've had time to kind of digest everything, and when I mean everything, I think people forget the loss of the national championship, Al Golden's departure, and Chad Bowden's departure was like 96 hours apart.
It's ridiculous.
Okay. So now that I've had time to kind of digest everything and the smoke is starting to clear, you sit back, and to Brian's point, you're like, gosh, this is still a really good football team. And what you're losing in leadership, you're making up for really outside of, because I don't know if the defensive tackle room has a Riley Mills in it,
it doesn't as we know right now, it doesn't.
Right.
There's no easy, well, when he's gone, right. Jack Kaiser's gone. We loved him, but it's like, that is the position where you're just like, oh, I love Jack. Great job. I don't want this to sound disrespectful, but they're going to be just fine because Jack did a great job. But you're like, oh, okay, I guess we have to start the Kingston, Viliama, Asa, Jaden Alsbury, Jalen Snead era.
Right.
It's like, well, it sucks to be us.
I guess we have to rotate in Madden for Ramo.
I know, right?
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And so
this needs more snaps for Jaden Alsbury. I don't know how they're going to win any games with that.
I know it, man. I know it. And when you start thinking about this team in that context and this side of the ball in that context, it's like, man, whoever takes over at defensive coordinator, compounded with the first overall point that we had is, head coaches in general just kind of have their tendencies. Lincoln Riley has been at different places now. He has had different offensive coordinators. And the one thing that has been consistent is that guy can develop quarterbacks, right? You go through and you look at the work that he's done, remains to be seen, post Caleb Williams, right? But still, the fact of the matter remains, when a coach has an identity like that, it's kind of like, think of Brian Hartline at Ohio State. The dude knows receivers, man. Then he has the absolute track record to prove it. Marcus Freeman is a guy that just knows defenses. And you have to assume that based on who he hired and who he's recruiting, he's almost kind of like, I don't mean for this word to be reflective of any coach, but he's almost like dummy-proofed it. You know what I mean? Like, it's literally based on the play. Like, that's how I look at it. I'm not saying that this is an unstoppable force, because that's what this entire conversation is about, is how do they become that? But with the just laundry list of talent that they have, I do firmly believe they would have to have a Brian Van Gorder-esque type of coordinator to come in for it to not play well. And I don't think Chris Ash is that. But the talent, the talent absolutely helps cushion whatever potentially could happen in 2025.
Well, a big thing is Marcus Freeman is not going to let it be what Brian Van Gorder was, because he will be more like Marcus. There's this notion that Marcus Freeman is just going to override a bunch of play calls in the middle of the game. I don't see that happening very often. That's a really quick way to lose your trust of your coaches. But I think that as we've seen, we saw a little bit late in the Oklahoma State game, he'll step in if things if it needs to happen, but we've also seen more so changes within a week, from week to week. Brian Kelly's just lack of, to use an NCAA term, lack of institutional control of the football team allowed for that to just manifest and grow and become a cancer.
No.
Marcus Freeman's chopping that sucker off the minute it even looks like it might be a problem. And that's the thing too, is I have a hard time believing, no matter what I think of the hire, that this is going to go on for let's just say Chris Ash is a bad coach. I have no thought at all that Marcus Freeman will wait till year 3 and then Pete Bavacqua's got to step in and make a change. This is exactly what happened with Brian Van Gorder.
Yeah.
Is Brian Kelly had no intention of firing Brian Van Gorder. Brian Kelly's boss said, "You're going to fire Brian Van Gorder." And Brian Kelly, is a survivalist, if anything. But I just don't see that becoming the issue for Marcus Freeman. And so that's where you say, Trev, like that presence is there. But again, even like, so it won't be Brian Van Gorder, even if he is that bad of a coach. But as we said, for all the critiques we have and the concerns we have, he's not that. Like, my concern is that he's more, like, I don't even know that, like, is he a Bob Diaco? Like, that's my concern, where like he's good but he's not great. If you give him the right talent, he'll be able to do some things. But then when you get in those big game situations against teams that maybe do something a little bit unorthodox, he's going to struggle a little bit. More that than he is a Brian Van Gorder.
Yeah.
But that's not going to win you a championship. And that's the thing that we're looking for here, is for Notre Dame to win a championship. But again, it's not that. But to your point, though, Trev, it's almost kind of like, but even that 2015 team had holes in certain spots, no depth on that team. And this team is just different. So the talent is a big thing. And part of that talent too, Trevor, is what excites me about this defense as we move forward, is just thinking of the youth movement that Notre Dame went through last year and how much that's going to pay off in 2025. Because you think about the identity, who were the face of the defense this year? It was the guys we've talked. It was Xavier Watts. It was Riley Mills. I mean, those were your 2 All-Americans. Jack Kaiser's a captain. And you think of Benjamin Morrison, who was kind of your star coming into the season, along with Xavier Watts, and those guys are gone. But you had RJ Oben came in, and Jordan Clark and Rod Hurd, and they all played key roles. But man, there was so much youth being playing on this defense this year. I'm going to pull this up, Trevor, and I'm going to look at the Pro Football Focus snaps and the number of snaps that were played on defense this year by a first or second year player. So the number of players that were in their first or second year that played more than 200 snaps. You had Kingston, Bryce Young, see here, Jaden Ausbury. You had Drake Bowen, Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, and Don Schuler. So 7 players from your freshman or sophomore class played more than 300 snaps this year. Boubacar played 133 as a true sophomore and would have played a lot more. I mean, so even though he only played 133, a lot of those snaps were done in bulk in the first 5 games. And then you had a bunch of redshirt sophomores like Josh Burnham, Jalen Sneed, Junior Telemaka, Donovan Heinisch, who all played 400 or more snaps. So you're talking about, what did I just list? 11 guys that have 2 or more seasons of eligibility remaining going into next season, all played over 300 snaps last season. And then you talk about, that's not even talking returners. That's not talking about the veterans like Gabriel Rubio and guys that were already veteran players. We're not even talking about those. Those are just guys that this season had 3 or more seasons of eligibility. Going into next year, have at least 2 years of eligibility, that played over 300 to 400 snaps on offense. Like that is a lot of youth that played a lot of snaps, and they played well. And you start thinking about what they're going to look like next year when they've got all these snaps under their belt. So it's not just talent, Trevor, because talent can only take you so far. It's experienced talent now. And that's going to be a big difference going into next season.
Well, to put some numbers, what you were talking about with Boubacar, he was on pace to have over 420 snaps over the course of a 16-game season. If you break down what he did in his first 5 games.
And that includes he got hurt in the first half against Louisville, Trevor. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. You go through and think about it, and it wasn't that long ago where all of the great leaders of Notre Dame's team that really turned it around after the first bye week. But it wasn't that long ago where we were asking where those guys were. You know what I'm saying? Like, outside of Xavier Watts, it was what is Howard Cross and Riley Mills doing? Like, what's going on with RJ Oben? It was a lot of those questions. And what was carrying Notre Dame's defense early on? It was the young guys.
Outside of Xavier.
Literally. And you go through and you look at, in the secondary, outside of Xavier Watts, it was Christian Gray and Adon Schuler. 2 first-time starters, a redshirt freshman and a true sophomore. You go through and you look at, okay, well, Jack's taking a little bit to kind of catch on. Don't really know what's happening here. Well, who started to stand out and start to rise and come up? Jaden Osbury, Drake Bowen, Kingston Viliama was playing as a true freshman. So along the defensive line, RJ Oben is not really what we thought he was going to be coming into this season. Riley Mills and Howard Cross don't seem to be playing like the 2023 versions of themselves yet. So who steps up? Boubacar, Junior Tuialamaka, who didn't even see meaningful defensive snaps till this 3rd game of the year.
Josh Burnham.
Yeah, Josh Burnham. Bryce Young, a true freshman. Logan Thomas stepped in when he needed to. I think Logan Thomas got a sack in the IU game.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you go through.
Well, remember, he had a fumble return for a touchdown that was called back against Louisville.
Yeah, he did.
It was the right call, but he was in the game. The point is he was in the game when that happened, and that was the 5th game of his career. Mm-hmm. So, and only the 2nd time he'd ever really played football. Crazy stat for you. This year, Logan Thomas had 5 total quarterback pressures, 2 sacks, 2 hits on the quarterback, and a pressure. Trevor, he had 28 pass rush snaps. That's it.
Talk about efficiency.
That's it. Now, again, I don't anticipate him doing this, but just for fun, if we were to take his pressure, just take how many times he gets a hit on the quarterback on a per snap basis, and you give him the same number of pass rush snaps as Junior Tuialamaka, he would have 30 sacks plus hits on the quarterback. That's not total. That's a great year in just pressures.
Yeah.
I'm talking about he would have that many sacks plus hits on the quarterback. For context's sake, this year, Abdul Carter for Penn State this season had 23 hits plus sacks on the quarterback on 352 pass rushes. If you look at total pressures that Logan Thomas had on a per snap basis, and you give him as many total pass rush opportunities as Abdul Carter, Abdul would have finished with 66 pressures. Logan Thomas would have had 63. Now, again, that's not how it works.
Right.
But I'm just saying, if you just look at that small sample size, even he, who didn't play a lot, showed impact talent in the limited snaps he had. Right. And I'm not saying that it's like they should have given him more snaps, because if they'd have given him more snaps, he would have been Abdul Carter. That's not the point I'm making. I'm simply saying he's a young kid that didn't play a whole lot, but in those moments, he showed that type of flash. And as you said, Trev, he stepped into some moments in a couple occasions this year where he was playing meaningful snaps against Indiana. He didn't play a lot of snaps against Indiana, but they were meaningful because the game was kind of still on the line. Same against Louisville. They were meaningful snaps. And that's something that you look at and say, he doesn't even include in our number of young players that got a lot of snaps this year. And you start getting kind of fired up about that.
Well, in big picture, you go through and you look at what this all means, right? Because that's kind of what we're talking about today. Why are we optimistic about the 2025 defense? It's because in recent years, or with other teams that experience that level of turnover, when they lose a Xavier Watts and a Riley Mills and a Ben Morrison and a Howard Cross and an RJ Oben, typically the people that are behind them, the players that are behind them, are going through what Notre Dame's young guys went through in 2024, right? But now they're asking them to be like, okay, we need you to go have that productivity without having that veteran leadership and experience on the field with you. Right. That's the difference, and which is something that's really exciting, right? Because you talk about like this team just played 16 games. There's only 3 other teams outside of Notre Dame that played in 16 games this season. And there's only one other team that played in the national championship in the first ever 12-team college football playoff. That experience is invaluable to guys who have now seen the entire process all the way through. Now, the biggest question is, can you take that experience and run with it? Or are you going to hang your hat on the fact that you made it that young and take it for granted? It's like, oh, we know what to do to get there. I don't think it's going to be the latter of those two. But you go through and think, and just the experience itself and the youth behind it is really, really exciting.
So here's some numbers to put behind it, Trevor. I'm looking at the 12 most played the guy, because you have go 11 most snaps on the defense. You have 11 starters. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those 11 were by freshmen, sophomores, or redshirt sophomores. Only one of those 6 was a redshirt sophomore. That's Josh Burnham. Christian Gray was number 2 on the team in snaps. And Don Schuler was number 3. Leonard Moore was 4. Drake Bowen was 7. He had over 600 snaps this year. Jaden Alsbury was 11. And then right behind Jaden Alsbury, 4 snaps behind is a redshirt sophomore, Donovan Heinisch. 1 snap behind him is a redshirt sophomore in Jalen Sneed. 1 snap behind him, true story, is another redshirt sophomore, Junior Tuilamaka. And your number 17 and 18 guys were a couple of freshmen, Bryce Young and Kingston Viliamasa, who all had over 340 snaps. And somebody asked the question the other day, how much does the playoff help your team in preparation? Last year in 2023, Notre Dame played 13 games. They had 13 players on defense that played over 300 snaps. Right? It's a decent amount. They used a heavy rotation. This year, Notre Dame had 20 guys who played over 300 snaps. That's a big difference. And that's not just the game snaps, but that's also, think of the practice work they got in those additional weeks. And that's a reason why you start looking ahead saying, I think it'll be okay on defense this year. And like Sean and I talked about yesterday, Trev, these aren't a bunch of try-hard guys we're talking about.
No.
A couple of those guys are. But when we start talking about Leonard Moore and Christian Gray and Don Schuler and Drake Bowen and Jaden Alsbury and Jalen Sneed and Josh Burnham, these are guys with some Bryce Young, Kingston, Logan Thomas, Boubacar. We're talking about some guys that have some talent, and it's a different level. And you think if your coaching is good, if your strength program is good, the expectation is that the vast majority of these guys take steps forward next season. And that's something to kind of be pretty excited about when you look at this defense.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's the biggest difference in talent overall, right? I mean, once you start breaking it down position group by position group, even, you know what I'm saying? If you break it down, you start looking at the secondary. The secondary alone, I believe, should still, and I know you do too, should still remain a strength of this defense. There's no sign of it. Now, I do believe that there'd be more question marks if Ben Morrison played the entire season. Leonard Moore would rotate in, kind of like what he was doing a little bit before Ben Morrison completely got hurt. But I think there'd still be more questions around, okay, now you have to find a way to replace Watts and Morrison.
We'd be talking about what we think Leonard Moore can do, not what we know Leonard Moore can do. Mm-hmm. Which now we're talking about what we know Leonard Moore can do because he had to play so much.
Which is just, first of all, Notre Dame they need to start being in the conversation of becoming a routine candidate for producing top-level quarterbacks, right? Like and now, sure, there's going to need to be some more, per the national media, there's going to have to be more results, I guess. You know, you had Cam Hart, you had Ben Morrison, but now you have the emergence of Leonard Moore. Christian Gray, I believe, is poised to have a really good comeback season in 2025, and then you look at what happens behind it.
Christian Gray was a lot better than some Notre Dame fans think he was last year. A lot better. and he had a couple rough moments, and then he got put in a situation he shouldn't have got put in the championship game because nobody was really going to step up in that spot and be able to just lock down Jeremiah Smith. But let's not forget, when Benjamin Morrison got hurt, there were a lot of Notre Dame fans who now like to bang on Christian Gray that at the time were talking about how they're going to be fine without Benjamin Morrison because they've got Leonard Moore, and Christian Gray was playing better than him anyway. Remember that conversation that people were having? Christian Gray's playing better than Benjamin Morrison anyway.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, well, now you all want to go out there and act like Christian Gray sucked all year. Christian Gray had a couple bad games this season, and then snap here, snap there. Outside of that, he was a pretty good football player when you consider he's a first-year starter. And he had some pretty big moments. I mean, even in the game against USC where he struggled, that kid still had a fourth down stop on the first drive of the game to get them to that point in time. He had 10 passes defense this season, which according to Pro Football Focus this season, right? Which I think was second on the team, first on the team. Well, let me go look and see what the official stats were. But according to Pro Football Focus, he was tied with Xavier Watts for the most passes defensed. If you look at the national rank, or like the official rankings, so not Pro Football Focus, but the official rankings, Christian Gray this year had 3 interceptions and 9 passes defensed. So he had 12 passes defensed. Leonard Moore had 13. So he trailed Leonard Moore by 1 pass defensed. So he was pretty good this year, Trev. And that was as a true sophomore making his first year as a starter. You expect him to get better, especially with what we know of his work ethic. Leonard Moore, as long as he stays hungry, is going to get better. Adon Schuler, I mean, sophomore, freshman. Their best football's probably still ahead of them. And then you have the transfer portal pickups. Devontae Smith's a really good football player for Alabama last year. He's not going to come to Notre Dame and be like, oh, this is a stage that's too big for me. He played against Alabama, Georgia last year. You know what I mean? He's played in the national championship game. He's played in college football playoff games. You got a guy that's been on this stage and been in these moments before. And so you add him to your nickel rotation. You add Jalen Stroman to your safety rotation. Is Jalen Stroman going to start? We'll see. If he does, they're going to have a good football player there. If he doesn't, it means somebody beat him out. And that's a great sign. And so what that does is that allows you to have a little bit of protection in case your younger players aren't as ready to play right away as what Christian was, as what Adon was, and as what Leonard was. So if Luke Talich isn't ready to take that big step to become a starter, or if Kennedy Urlacher's not ready for that, or if Bronte Johnson's not ready for that, or if your elite incoming freshman DB class of Jadon Blair and Brandon Logan, Ethan Long at safety, and then Dallas Gold, Mark Zachary, and Cree Thomas a corner isn't ready to help you right away, you're good. Oh, and by the way, I keep forgetting about their 6'1", 195-pound rising sophomore who's probably this, a step behind Leonard Moore and Christian Gray in pure speed in Carson Hobbs. So it's like you feel like, okay, they're going to be pretty good. And the reason that we say all those names is because depth of talent helps ensure that there's no drop-off, because you're not just depending on one guy to step in and replace a stud that left. It's of these 4, you just need one to step up and play.
Yeah.
And that's why depth is so important, is that right there, because you may miss on one guy, but your odds of missing on 4 are slim when you've got the track record that Notre Dame has of identifying talent in the secondary. And that's what kind of gets you. You don't need 6 of your freshmen to step up and help you this year. You really don't need any. But if one does, you're in a great place. And that's what gets you, like, okay, to your point, Trev, like you brought up, this is why we expect this secondary to not miss a beat. Even with do I expect Jalen Stroman or whoever to be as good as Xavier Watts? No. But I think Adon Schuler is going to be better than he was. Not Xavier, than Adon was. Adon's going to be better than Adon. Leonard's going to be better than Leonard. Christian's going to be better than Christian. And I think Devontae Smith has a chance to at least be as good as what Jordan Clark was, maybe better.
Yeah.
And that's why, as a unit, even though there's no Xavier Watts, as a unit, the expectation is that they're going to just keep rolling, if not be better than what they were this past season. And remember, we said that last offseason. And some people kind of like mocked it, like, come on, you lost Cam Hart, you lost this year, and we're like, look, don't be shocked if it's even better than it was last year. And it absolutely was. At the very least, every bit as good as it was last year.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I would argue that in a lot of instances, it was even better as a unit than what it was last year.
Well, I think that's just the toughest part. I mean, going back to the conversation around Christian Gray, man, that's the life of a corner. Yeah, I would put cornerback up there with quarterback in that, to the eye, like when you're watching it on TV, their mistakes are the most glaring, right? Obviously, quarterback mistakes, you miss a wide open guy, you throw an interception, everybody's like, what the heck is that? I would say a close second is corner, right? Because a lot of times when a corner does something well, it doesn't get highlighted, right? It's, yes, interceptions get highlighted, but like just good coverage, like that's why stats are so hard to track as corners. Yeah, everybody wanted to bang on Ben Morrison at the start. Say, well, he's not having as good of as he doesn't have as many interceptions. Like, but see, here's the thing: the way that I look at it is, typically, if a corner is doing his job, he doesn't really get targeted all that much, which
Right.
means he's going to have less opportunities to get interceptions. The reason why he had so many in 2022 is, seems like, okay, do we throw a Cam Hart or the true freshman? I guess we'll throw it the true freshman, and Ben Morrison made him pay for it, And so you go through and with Christian, I think it was a lot of that. He did a lot of good things this season, a lot in 2024. It's just the mistakes are more highlighted. And like, who are we
When
talking
you
about?
play man defense and you make a mistake, it's everyone in the planet's going to know that you made a mistake.
100%.
That's
100%.
the nature of man defense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is why Christian went on record so many times. He talked about it in the Here Comes the Irish documentary. He's talked about it in interviews about just Marcus Freeman and Mike Mickens talking about just, hey, one play, one life. You have to flush it. You have a bad play, you turn around and you could have a 98-yard interception return on the next play. And that's the life of a corner. But they have so many guys loaded up in that room. I say all that to say they have a depth of talent that I think can compete with anybody's depth of talent in all of college football in the secondary. Something that has now been a story for multiple years, and something that I haven't been able to say outside of really 23 and 24 in my entire span of being a Notre Dame fan. And that's what makes you excited about the secondary unit, man.
You know what's funny is a year ago we were talking about, Benjamin and Christian are going to be a great duo. And then going into 24, the talk is going to be about Christian Gray being a star. Well, we are in that situation where another corner is now being mentioned as the next star, but it's not Christian Gray. It's Leonard Moore. And what he did this year was not a fluke. It was not like he had he got targeted a lot and made some interceptions. Like we've seen that before where a freshman gets a lot of picks and he gets a lot of a lot of focus. And so he makes plays because they go at him a lot, but you look at his numbers and he's like, he gave up a lot of catches and all that. He wasn't really as good as his production. Leonard Moore was every bit as good on film and grading him out as his accolades show. I mean, he was special. And when you look at a guy like Christian, he's going to get better. He didn't finish as well as he started, but he showed early in the season and at times in the middle of this late in the season when he like Penn State, he was very good against Penn State. He had that one hold, but he was very good against Penn State. He was very good against Indiana. The only play where they beat him against Indiana that early in the game, he was in perfect coverage. The guy caught the ball with his knees, literally. Have you gone back and seen that he literally caught the ball with his knees because he couldn't catch it clean because of Christian's coverage. He struggled on a couple plays against Georgia, was good outside of that, and then he had a couple mistakes against Ohio State. Some of that was on him, and so it's also about, as a coaching staff, doing a better job of putting Christian in more situations. Like somebody in the chat's talking about, you'll know who it is because it's a negative comment. Just kidding, Chris. Love you, man. But talking about how Christian Gray's at fault, and Marvin or Emeka Egbuka's calling out what he's doing, and like that's not a Christian Gray problem. That's a coaching problem. Talking about how he's inside leverage, and when he does inside leverage, they knew he was going to do that because he'd done that all year. Why are you asking him to do that? Because when he's good is when he's coming up and playing more aggressively or playing more man coverage. That's a tough thing to ask of a younger player playing to the field. They hadn't had a young guy playing to the field for a while because Cam was a fifth-year senior in 23 and a senior in 2022. And so those are the things you say, could you have maybe done a better job of putting him in some better spots? Sure. But now it's up to Christian to say, okay, sure, that's true. But now you've got to make the improvements to say you're going to be able to play those things better. And you expect him to do that because, again, he was a sophomore who played 100-some snaps the year before. Now you're going into your junior season, and there isn't that same pressure on Christian to be the next Benjamin Morrison because that guy is now Leonard Moore.
Yeah.
Now it's just, dude, just go be you. He played 198 snaps, by the way, the year before. And a chunk of those came in the bowl game.
Mm-hmm.
The last 2 games, really, because he played 32 against Stanford and then 30 against Oregon State. So a third of his snaps came in 2 games. And now it's like, okay, raise your level of play. But, I mean, that's the kind of thing where I'm talking about, Trevor's like, and if he struggles, you've got Carson Hobbs, you've got Dallas Golden, you've got Cree Thomas, you've got Mark Zachary, you've got, they could leave Bronte Johnson at corner. The plan is to move him back to safety, but I talked to a couple people that said he looked so good at corner that he was an emergency corner. That's the only reason he moved to corner. But he looked so good playing it that they're like, do we want to consider keeping him there or not? I mean, that's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
And so when I look at those things, it's kind of like the talent is there. And the one thing Chris and I can agree on is he's got to be more consistent with his technique. That we absolutely agree on. And the comment that Chris made that I do agree on is that's what makes Benjamin Morrison, but most guys are not that way. Most guys are not like Benjamin. Leonard Moore was not like Benjamin. Leonard Moore is just so fast that he can overcome some of his own mistakes, which is easier to do in the boundary than it is to the field. And that's what people have to understand as well. Christian has got a lot more room to work, which means those mistakes you make can be more glaring because there's more room for you to get beat with those mistakes.
Right.
He's got to become more technically proficient. If Christian takes great pride in his craft this offseason, and I'm not saying he hasn't, I'm just saying this is what moving forward. And now that you've got the experience, you understand the coverages, the defenses, what now it's about, dude, perfect your craft. He's going to be really good next season. As long as he gets that mistakes out of his, like when a play like that can happen to a young guy, sometimes that can haunt him. If Christian can just put it behind him, it is what it is, move on, and understand that probably every cornerback on your roster probably gets beat in that same situation. Move past it. Focus on becoming that guy that takes more pride in his craft now that you're a veteran. Then he's gonna be outstanding, and this could end up being the best corner combo Notre Dame's had in a long time, which is saying something when you consider what they had in 2023 with Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison. But it's going to require Christian to really look, to put all the negativity out of his mind, because he was a pretty good player for the most of this year. Put that negativity out of your mind, put those couple big plays out of your mind, and just say, hey, man, I'm going to get in the lab and I'm going to put all my attention on, I'm going to be like, learn from Benjamin Morrison, study his film, the efficiency with his footwork, how to be handsy without grabby. Benjamin was great at being handsy without grabby.
Yeah.
That's something he's going to have to learn because he gets grabby. And those are things, but the tools are there, Trevor, for Christian to be outstanding. And the performance he's building on was way better than some people want to give it credit for. And that's something that gets you excited about what he can be this next season.
Oh, yeah. Look, man, last thing I'll say before we kind of keep the train moving here is my prediction for 2025 is the Gray Leonard Moore combo will start to resemble what the Hart Morrison combo was in 23. But I think Christian Gray takes on more of the Cam Hart role. Leonard Moore is kind of like the shiny new toy, right? Like he's the next big name. He's a preseason All-American, break it as a freshman, rightfully so, right? And same thing in 2023. Ben Morrison was the guy that held Marvin Harrison to what he had, 3 for 32 in that game in Notre Dame Stadium. Ben Morrison was
in 2 years against him, he gave up less than 100 yards combined.
Yeah, I mean, that's
because he played him a lot in 2022 as a true freshman as well, his first career game. Remember, he had the pass breakup. I think that might have actually been that was on Marvin. He broke a pass up in front of Marvin Harrison.
Yeah,
that whole offseason, all the Ohio State fans kept telling us that Marvin's going to be better than what Jackson Smith and Jigba was and all that other kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you go through and you look at the potential of them, and I think I could see Christian Gray kind of taking on that role of the Cam Hart, like just the old reliable, playing really, really good football, and that's just that's what I see from Christian. Now, moving along here on the defense, you start talking about what other groups you expect to kind of maintain and even elevate their level of play. Linebackers are 100% in that conversation. And it's a combination now of not just the explosiveness and the potential of the athleticism of the young guys. Now you throw the experience in on top of that. Man, we're talking about a really, really talented group of guys in the linebacking room, Bryan. Really talented.
I had a former Notre Dame player and I were having a disagreement on Notre Dame's talent late in the season, and he told me he didn't think Notre Dame's linebackers ran. Like, he thought I was nuts for thinking their linebackers were as athletic as the Georgia and those kind of guys. And I was like, wow. And there's this group of Notre Dame fans, and I don't know where this comes from, that just is down on the linebackers. I don't get it. I have no idea where that comes from, because I think the linebackers were pretty good this year. They were inconsistent at times. They played like you'd think a group of younger players are going to play, where at times they weren't in the position they needed to be. And at times they, would have some fits that weren't great. But overall, especially when you put the context of their youth, I thought the linebacker room was pretty good this year. And, and gosh, I mean, as much as I have banged on Pro Football Focus and how much I hate their grades and things like that, I mean, they had Drake Bowen as an 80 grade this season, which is really good, by the way. I think that's better than what they had Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah back in 2020. Actually, yeah, he would have been the second highest graded player on the entire 2021 defense. And he would have been the number one graded player on the 2020 defense. Now, again, I have my issues with Pro Football Focus, so I hesitate to put too much emphasis onto that. But that's a pretty darn good season for him. And when you consider it was his first year really being a player in the Notre Dame defense, to the degree that he played some mop-up minutes the year before and things like that. And here's nothing. You look at the number of runs, like stuffs that he had. In 2023, J.D. Bertrand had 31 run stops, and he had on 647 snaps. So don't look at games played, look at snaps. 647, and he had 31 run stops. This year, Drake Bowen had 30 run stops on 615 snaps. So you're talking about a guy that, from a run stopping standpoint, was very similar to what J.D. Bertrand was the year before as a fifth-year senior. And that's why I keep saying, like, this kid was a pretty good football player for Notre Dame last year. You look at his number of tackles. He had 40 solo tackles, 38 stops. The year before, J.D. Bertrand had 76 tackles, 41 solos, 35 assisted tackles. Again, you say, well, he played number of snaps. He played 30 fewer snaps than J.D. played the year before, because he was part of a bigger rotation. So his production on a per snap basis was better than what J.D. Bertrand's was the year before as a third-year starter and a fifth-year senior on that defense. That's pretty darn good. Now, where J.D. was better is J.D. made more plays behind the line, and that's the next step for Drake. But when you look at what he did, what Kingston did, Jaden Ausberry did not start a single game all year and tied for second on the Notre Dame defense in tackles for loss. Think about that. And then Jalen Sneed, early in the year, kind of looked a little bit like he did last year, athletic but out of position. But by the middle to end of the year, Jalen Sneed was becoming a playmaker for the Notre Dame defense, but he was doing it without having the mistake plays that plagued him so much in the past. That's the difference. Jaden Sneed's always been a playmaker, but it would be like you kind of got to balance his playmaking with, is he going to be in the right position? And they found that niche for him this year. Now he's going to be a senior next year. And then you're adding Madden Faramo. You've got Preston Zinner. You've got Bodie Cahoon coming off an injury. You've got Teddy Rizak. You've got Kahanu Kia should be back this spring. after what he did last year. You're going to be deep at linebacker. You're going to be long at linebacker. You're going to be athletic at linebacker. And you're actually going to have more experience next year than you had this year. You don't have anyone on your defense that has the number of snaps that Jack Kaiser played, but your top 5 guys are going to be way more experienced than your top 5 guys last year. Last year it was Jack and then a bunch of dudes who never really played many meaningful snaps. This year it's going to be a bunch of dudes that have played meaningful snaps. Even though they're still kind of young, they've played a lot of football. And when you combine that with talent, you're like, okay, I start getting a little bit fired up about what this linebacker core is going to be. And we saw that at times in the postseason. I mean, I thought against Georgia, the linebackers were outstanding.
Oh, they were fantastic.
You know, early on against Penn State, they struggled. Second half against Penn State, they were really good. So I'm fired up for what this defense, this group can be at linebacker. And it's another reason for optimism when you look at why we think this defense is going to be so good next year. And I'll say this, Trev, one of the question marks we have is defensive tackle. We've talked about that. I don't know that they have a Riley Mills. I don't think that they do. I don't know that they have, well, Riley Mills from Louisville on, right? I don't know that they have a Howard Cross from 2023. I do think they'll be better than what Howard Cross was in 2024.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing we've got to remember. Howard Cross in 2024 wasn't as good as Howard Cross in 2023 because he was banged up a lot. He had a hamstring injury coming into the season. Then he had the knee injury later in the season. We never got the best of Howard Cross this year. But Riley Mills, we got really good version of Riley Mills the last 10 games of his career. I don't know who that replacement's going to be. I will say this, however, there's a chance that on the whole, this defensive line room could be better inside than it was last year because you don't have that impact guy at the top, but you have more beef this year. Because remember, Gabriel Rubio missed the first, 6 games of the year last year?
Yeah, with
5 games of the year last year with a foot injury.
Yep.
He was never full 100% because of coming back from that foot injury. Jason Onye gets booted off the team after 6 games. Riley Mills gets, starts slow. They go better. Then Riley goes down against Indiana. Howard goes down against Florida State. He was never the same. Even though he came back for the playoff, he was a shell of himself. So you are looking at it and you're losing some individually good players, but your unit as a whole was a mash unit all season, really. You never really got the best of what that D-tackle room could be, which I think makes it a little bit easier to transition, where now you've got more bodies, you're more experienced. Gabriel hopefully can be healthy this offseason. Donovan Heinisch got some much-needed experience. He gets another year in the weight room. Armo Mukum's now going to be a junior. He got a lot of reps this year. Sevillano is a year older. Brennan Vernon, Devin Houston. Hopefully Cole Mullins can come back from injury. I still don't understand why he's playing D-tackle, but whatever. That's what they're playing him. And then when you talk about what you're adding in the transfer portal, I think you can be steady there this year, where you weren't steady last year. They're not going to be as dynamic as what they were last year when that unit was on. There's no Riley Mills pass rusher. We'll talk about that in a second. But I actually do believe there's the potential to be more steady up the middle, where maybe you're not making the plays, but you're better at taking on blocks, you're better at eating up space, and you're better prepared to allow the linebackers to run to the ball than maybe you were this year. There's a chance for that. You need Jared Dawson to be what we hope he could be. You've got to hope that Rubio can get back to kind of what he was because I don't think Gabriel Rubio was as good this year as he was last year because of the foot injury and the time he missed in the offseason. He wasn't as productive. He didn't make as many plays on the ball. He'll be healthier now, and I expect him to be better. And so I think there's at least a chance that they're at the very least on the same level of last year's defensive tackle rotation. There's a chance they're better against the run, where I think I'm more confident they're going to take a step back, barring something breaking out that we don't anticipate. I don't think the pass rush is going to be as good. Jared Dawson is actually a better pass rusher on a per-snap basis than Riley Mills and Howard Cross were, but it's a different type of pass rush. He's a different type of body. He's not that 6'5" long guy like Riley Mills was, but he can rush the quarterback. I mean, I've pointed this out before. So the point is, it's a question mark, but it's not a question mark where we're like, there's no talent, there's no numbers. You've got 9 guys there that have some level of ability. You only got to find 4 of them that can play good football on a regular basis. That's where we say that depth is what comes into play of why you feel. So, like, I actually think there's a chance the D tackle room, when you look at how it played out, not what we thought the D tackle room was going to be or what the D tackle room was when it was at its best, but just what it was from start to finish and what it was in the last 3 games after Riley got hurt. I certainly think the defensive tackle room in 2025 is going to be better than what it was against Penn State, Georgia, and Ohio State. Will it be better than what it was against Indiana when Riley was healthy? Okay, that's debatable, but they won a couple big games after Riley got hurt. And the defense wasn't terrible in those 2 games. So that's where I kind of come from and say, between all the different bodies, I feel like at least 4 or 5 of them can step up and give you some level of play to where, as a unit, you could actually be a bit improved than you were this year in a lot of areas in this defense. That's my 2 cents on that one, Trev. What do you think?
Yeah, man, I think the interior of the defensive line is going to take on a little bit of a different role in 2025. I think you said it perfectly. I don't think you can rely on them as much of a pass rush, but I think Notre Dame is going to be more of an edge rushing team next season anyways because of who they bring back, right? So I think this year it was more of a glaring issue when their interior, when Riley Mills wasn't around, when Howard Cross wasn't healthy, when Donnie Heinisch wasn't able to generate a pass rush. And Gabe Rubio just isn't a pass rushing defensive tackle. That's fine. But I think it was more glaring this past season because of the lack of effectiveness of the edge rushers. This upcoming season, I think you're going to have a lot more production from them. So I think it makes, not necessarily makes, I think it alleviates some of the pressure from your nose tackle and your 3 technique from having to be like, okay, we have to stop the run and we are one of the sole people on this team that can get after the quarterback too. I think that kind of put them in a little bit of a bind to where when we're watching the games, it makes it a little bit more obvious when one of those 2 things aren't happening. It's because they're wearing multiple hats, which to some degree you have to ask a defensive tackle to do. You can't just be, all right, we'll just go in there and eat up space. I know it's 3rd down. We're not expecting much of it.
You can in certain defenses,
Sure.
but not this one. And even like a team like Georgia, who asked their interior guys to just eat up space, on 3rd down, they make sub packages where they get different guys in the field. And to your point, Trev, is they'd have to adjust their philosophy a little bit to accommodate not having pass rushers.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with Riley and Howard, you had 2 guys that could rush the passer. This unit, like if you have Jared Dawson on the field with Gabriel Rubio, which is possible because Jared Dawson played primarily 3 technique and even some 4-eye. At Louisville, like a lot of people think he's a nose tackle. He may be able to play nose tackle. I don't know, but he didn't play very much nose tackle for Louisville. He was a disruptive 3 technique. And so if you have those 2 on the field together, let's just say you have Gabriel at nose and Jared Dawson at 3 technique, you're okay there at one of those spots. But to your point, you're not going to get the same pass rush out of Gabriel Rubio than you did out of Howard Cross. I mean, and look, I think Gabriel Rubio is a better pass rusher than he showed this season because he had 1 pressure the whole year is what, according to Pro Football Focus. But that was on 130 pass rushes. He had 8 pressures last year on 68 pass rushes. So he has been a better pass rusher in the past. But if you give him the same number of snaps as this year, only had 15 pressures. And they were all hurries. None of them were like hits and sacks and things like that. You hope that he can at least, if he's healthy, give you at least a better push up the middle with those big, long arms, that he can be that kind of pressure player, sure, Trevor, and then the quarterback doesn't have like lanes to step into. But to your point is, you're going to be okay losing that interior pass rush if your edges are better. And that's an expectation we have. Now, that's probably the biggest asterisk of all this. Somebody got really mad because I don't say asterisk right, but whatever, I don't care. You all know what I mean. It's this is the one where it takes more projection than other positions. Like at corner, at safety, at linebacker. It's like, dude, just have normal year 1 to year 2 growth. That's it. I don't need Christian Gray to be some, go from what he was in 2024 to Champ Bailey in 2025. Just have normal year 1 to year 2 growth as a starter. Drake Bone, I don't need you to become Manti Te'o next year. Just have normal year 1 to year 2 growth. Same thing with Kingston and Jaden and all those guys. Defensive end is the one position where and all those guys finish the year healthy for the most part. Defensive end is the one where you look at and say, A, it requires them to get guys healthy that right now aren't. B, it requires a bit of a coaching adjustment where you're going to have to do a better job, in my opinion. Washington did a lot of good things this year. One thing I need to see more of from this unit is just a better array of hand play, moves, counters as pure pass rushers than what we saw last year. One of the issues they had is if they rush wide and it's covered, they only had one move. And it usually just kind of resulted in their pass rush was dead, but there was still room for the quarterback to step into the pocket. That was okay because you were getting really good penetration from your interior guys. Well, if you don't have that next year, that becomes a problem. They need like as I said the other day, they need more tools in the tool bag. We don't know if they're going to be taught that or not. And then number 3, I do think there's a level of projection of guys doing things we haven't seen them do a lot of. I think Josh Burnham has the tools to be a much better pass rusher than he has been, but he hasn't shown it. So can he show that? Can Junior Tuihalamaka do that more consistently? Yes, he did it against Georgia, but we didn't then see that the next couple games. So there's a lot of projection there with some of those guys. Bryce Young has a lot of tools. He wasn't exactly super disruptive. He was flashy. He looked good doing it. But I wouldn't necessarily say that, the pressure numbers were all that impressive from Bryce. And that's something that he's going to have to do a better job of next year as well. So it's more than just normal jumps. And then, of course, Logan Thomas is another guy we'd have that conversation about. So, it's going to take a little bit more. And the other thing, too, is you're going to need more of just a normal freshman to sophomore jump from Bryce Young, because Notre Dame needs him to be more of an impact guy, not just a good pass rusher, but they need him to be an impact guy. That's where I think the edge possession discussion is a little bit different, because that's the one where I think we're projecting more than at least I am, than any other position. But at the same time, Trevor, we're going to get into the if game now, which is never where you want to be. You never want to be in the if game.
Right.
At DB, there's no ifs. Just do what you do. Just, your linebacker, guys, just keep normal development. DB, keep here. It's if. But the ifs are potentially like really exciting. If Boubacar comes back healthy and can stay healthy, that's an if. Mm-hmm. But if he does it, if Bryce Young makes the jump that we think his talent could dictate in year 2, if Logan Thomas can make that year 2 jump that I think he's capable of now, because remember, Logan Thomas missed a bunch of the offseason because of an injury, a shoulder injury.
Yeah.
He didn't do much in the spring. So he did what he did this year on just, you've got God-given talent. He didn't even have a lot of time in the weight room. Remember, he was injured almost all spring. Now he gets a full offseason in the weight room, in the strength program, in the defensive system, getting coached by Al Golden. If he has a big jump, if Josh Burnham improves his repertoire, there's a lot of ifs here, Trevor. But there's a lot of ifs of really athletic guys. Josh Burnham is the 6'4", 240-pound guy with super long arms and a lot of athleticism. Ryan and I used to talk about this, where we're sitting side by side at the Syracuse game in 2022 when he was a freshman, and we're watching him go through drills, and we're just like, that guy's just different. He moves different. He's built different. He's got some. He just hasn't been able to translate that athleticism that made him a great linebacker and quarterback in high school into being an edge rusher yet. good edge setter in the run game. He's made some flashy plays. We're more talking about as a pass rusher.
Yeah.
But the tools are there. Bryce Young is 6'7", 265 and twitchy. Boubacar is 6'4", 240 plus and twitchy. Logan Thomas is 6'4", but he's got the length of a 6'8" guy, and he might be the most explosive guy they have. So the tools are outstanding, Trevor. It's just a lot of ifs to get him to play to that talent. But I got to be honest, this is the one position where I'm doing more projecting than I am just follow your normal progression. Just keep doing what you're supposed to do. And that can get a little bit risky. But this also might be the position group that has as much upside as any on the roster. I mean, think about it. If Boubacar's healthy and taps in his potential, Bryce Young does the same, Logan Thomas does the same, Josh Burnham does the same, and you get Junior has normal growth, and then you've maybe Chris Burgess can maybe help you out a little bit, or maybe they move Brendan Vernon out to end, or maybe they move Cole Mullins back out to end, or whatever the case may be. Jordan Patel, I forgot to mention Jordan Patelho. If he comes back healthy and just what he was last year, it's got the potential to be an outstanding group of edge players.
Yep.
But the counter is that requires a lot of ifs and projection that we're not making in other positions. The other positions were just normal growth and development. There's a lot of confidence is going to happen. This is more of a, you need to see bigger jumps. You need to see health and all these other type of things. And that's what makes it concerning. But it's also a reason for optimism, Trev, because if just half of those guys hit, whew.
Well, look, man, the reason why there's so many ifs, the way that I look at it is because it's the group of guys that you're asking them to do more than the secondary and the linebackers. But the reason why I'm comfortable playing the if game with them is because we are not asking them to do, the coaching staff isn't asking them to do anything that is beyond their realm of capabilities, right? There have been some D lineman rooms and some position groups at Notre Dame on past teams where it's like, yeah, I mean, if you ask that of them, you're asking them something that they can't physically do. You know, it's just some of the maturation is going to have to go by a little bit quicker. For me, the storyline for the defensive line as a whole, interior, edge rushers, you have to play with a higher level of consistency because and health is absolutely a factor in that. But you can go and you can list off every single player that you talked about in between the D tackles and nose tackles, three techniques, Vipers, big ends. They all flashed at one point in 2024. Every single one of them did. But the thing is now it can't be so few and far in between. You know what I'm saying? Like it can't be, man, did you see Bryce Young on that play? And then we don't see him again virtually for another 6 quarters. Like and I'm not talking about it'd be great because he has the potential to, but like an Isaiah Foskey, like every third down, you're just probably going to see him. You know, he has that potential to get there. I'm not asking for that to be the jump from your true freshman year to your true sophomore year, right? But the progression has to be more than just you were a flashy freshman with a lot of upside to, okay, now you're a contributor on defense to then the junior year. It's like, okay, this dude is a dude. What you're kind of in the position now is, hey, Bryson, you're going to kind of have to make that jump from being a true freshman to like the tail end of your sophomore year where you're coming on and being that guy. He's one of, right? Because to your point, with the mass depth of talent that they have, odds are you're going to hit on a couple, right? Like that is literally just numbers and probability.
What are the odds that none of those guys make the jump? And that's the point.
Yeah.
What evidence do you have that at Notre Dame under Marcus Freeman, the way that it has been the last several years, that we don't see a position group have anybody step up? It hasn't happened. We haven't seen that happen. So you like you said, Trev, you have to think at least one guy steps up. Odds are greater that 2 step up in some capacity, even if it's 2 guys in the same position, which we'll actually talk about here in a second. But we're going to have some fun before our mailbag. We're actually going to talk about breakout players next. And so, but before we do that, folks, see that little thumbs up down there below? Go ahead and hit that for us if you don't mind, which is the like button. It helps to support our channel. Make sure you share this podcast. See, all these things help us with the algorithm, so that way YouTube will hopefully then start promoting our show more than they have been the last year, which I know some of you have complained about. That's why you got to hit that like. We had a show yesterday, Trev, that has over 6,000 views on it, right? So we did the RTCF show. It's got over 6,600 views from yesterday. It's only got 389 likes. I just hit the like, so it's just 390. It's a very low percentage. So if you're listening to the show and you like what we're doing, hit that like button. That's the thing that kind of helps us promote the show. So we would really appreciate that. And it takes you literally, I did that. I'm going to do it again. 1, 2, 3. 3 seconds to do it. That's it. 3 seconds and you're helping us out. So we'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, as always, make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com.